Captain Jack Monroe gripped the controls of his crippled ship, sweat dripping down his brow. Alarms blared in his ears, the console flickering as his vessel spiraled out of control. A navigation malfunction had thrown him far off course, into the depths of uncharted space. Now, he was plummeting toward a desolate planet, its jagged landscape growing larger with each passing second. He fought with the controls, but the ship wasn't responding. With a deep breath, Jack braced himself, pulling the emergency stabilizers just before impact. The ground rushed up to meet him, and everything went dark. When he awoke, the smell of smoke filled his lungs. His ship was a wreck, half buried in the dirt, twisted metal groaning as the cooling systems failed. Jack pushed himself up, wincing as pain shot through his side. His ribs were likely bruised, but nothing seemed broken. He surveyed the barren landscape through the cracked windshield, a wasteland of rocky spires and deep craters, with no signs of life in sight. Jack staggered to his feet and checked his systems. Communications were down. His only chance of survival now was to find shelter, water, and some way to signal for help. As he pulled his emergency pack from the wreckage, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something or someone was out there. His instincts kicked in. He reached for his sidearm, heart pounding. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable through the thick dust hanging in the air, but it was unmistakable. Whatever was out there was watching him. He stepped away from the wreckage, scanning the horizon. The wind howled across the barren land, sending dust swirling around him. And then he saw it, a figure stumbling toward him from a rocky outcropping. Two figures, actually, one taller, the other smaller, struggling to keep pace. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't raise it. As the figures drew closer, their forms became clear. An alien woman, her skin a deep iridescent blue, and a child, barely able to stand. Both were bleeding, their clothes torn, eyes wide with fear. The woman collapsed before Jack, clutching her child close. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He knelt beside her, his soldier's instincts warring with a deeper, more primal urge to help. "Who are you?" he asked, though he doubted she would understand. Her eyes flickered open, and in that instant, Jack felt a pressure in his mind, a wave of emotion not his own. Fear, desperation, and a fleeting image of monstrous creatures closing in on them. The connection broke as quickly as it had come, leaving Jack stunned. Telepathy, he realized. These beings weren't just sentient. They were in danger. The woman's trembling hand reached out, brushing against his wrist. He could see the terror in her eyes, the silent plea for help. Her child, weak and dazed, barely clung to consciousness, its small hand grasping at Jack's jacket. Jack swore under his breath. He didn't have the supplies or the strength to help them, not here, not now. But he couldn't leave them to die, not when they were so clearly on the run from something much worse. Carefully, he pulled a medical kit from his pack, beginning with the mother's wounds. He cleaned and bandaged her gashes as best as he could, his hands moving on autopilot. The child stirred, blinking up at him with wide, glassy eyes. Jack wasn't a father, but the innocence in that gaze stirred something deep inside him. As he worked, he scanned the area, his soldier's instinct prickling. Whatever had attacked them might still be near. He needed to move fast. The woman, now slightly more stable, reached out once more, this time with more focus. A flood of images flashed through his mind. Her people, the Atrine, fleeing from a monstrous, reptilian race. The Scytharas, cold, calculating, and merciless. The Scytharas pursued without mercy, hunting down the Atrine for reasons Jack couldn't fully comprehend. But one thing was clear. Their attackers would soon arrive here. Jack finished bandaging the child's wounds, his thoughts racing. He couldn't stay here. They'd be easy prey for whatever was coming. The only option was to find a defensible position and buy some time. He hoisted the mother over his shoulder, then helped the child to its feet. "Come on," he said. "We need to move. Now." Jack led the alien mother and child through the jagged terrain, his mind racing. Every step felt like a countdown. Behind them, the sky darkened, not from clouds but from the incoming ships of the Scytharas, cold-blooded predators that wouldn't stop until every last latrine was eliminated. The mother, Zaira, was barely able to walk, her strength faltering with each step. Her child, Lizer, clung to her side, exhaustion evident in the way his small legs dragged through the dust. Jack stayed close, urging them forward. His soldier's instincts told him that staying in the open was suicide. They needed cover, somewhere defensible, somewhere they could regroup and prepare for whatever was coming. "There," Jack said, pointing toward a narrow canyon that cut through the landscape. Its towering cliffs offered both shelter and the high ground, should they need to make a stand. It was their best shot. As they entered the canyon, the wind shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of engines. Jack's heart sank. The Scytharas were closing in. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. The first of their scout ships hovered just beyond the rocky outcrops, insect-like in their design, black and sleek, moving with precision. "They've found us," Jack muttered under his breath. He pulled out his sidearm, the weight of it reassuring but not nearly enough. His own resources were limited, and the alien tech he had scavenged earlier was unfamiliar. He needed a plan. Zaira, sensing his tension, reached out again with her mind. This time, the images were clearer, more focused. Jack saw her people, the Atrine, once a proud race of scholars and explorers, now reduced to refugees, fleeing from world to world as the Scytharas laid waste to everything in their path. And then in a flash he saw it, a device, small and crystalline, held in Zaira's hands, its glowing core pulsating with energy. "The hive," Jack whispered aloud, understanding. The Scytharas weren't just ruthless, they were connected, each soldier a piece of a larger mind. Their coordination, their relentlessness. It all came from the hive mind, a network that connected every Scytharas on the battlefield. The device Zaira carried wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon, a way to sever that connection, to disrupt the Scytharas' control over their forces. "Why didn't you use it?" Jack asked, glancing at her. Zaira's telepathic response came, slower this time, weighed down by fatigue. "Not enough power. Too many of them." She slumped against a rock, gasping for breath, her once vibrant skin now a pale, sickly hue. The device had potential, but not here, not with the odds so heavily stacked against them. Jack's mind raced. They needed more time, more space to maneuver, but the canyon they had taken refuge in was turning into a dead end. The Scytharas were closing in, and soon the scouts would report their location back to the main force. He scanned the area, looking for anything that could give them an advantage. The canyon walls, sharp and uneven, offered little, but then his eyes caught sight of an old, abandoned structure built into the rock. It looked ancient, likely left behind by a long-gone civilization. More importantly, it had height. "That's where we'll make our stand," Jack said, gesturing toward the structure. He helped Zaira to her feet, supporting her as they hurried across the canyon floor. Lizer, though weak, followed close behind, his eyes wide with fear but determination etched in his face. The structure was dilapidated, but it provided a vantage point. Jack quickly assessed their position. From here, they could see the entire canyon mouth. If the Scytharas approached, they'd have a narrow choke point to defend. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He placed Zaira and Lizer in the shadow of the old structure, then began setting up what little defenses he could. A few improvised traps using the alien tech he'd found, his sidearm primed, and the terrain to their advantage. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. As he worked, Zaira watched him with weary eyes. Despite her exhaustion, there was a flicker of admiration in her gaze, a recognition of Jack's determination. He wasn't a Trine, and yet he fought for them as if their lives mattered as much as his own. Lizer, still trembling, edged closer to Jack. The boy looked up at him, eyes filled with questions that couldn't be asked. Jack knelt beside him, his voice soft. "We're going to get through this." You're stronger than you think. Liza didn't respond, but his small hand reached out, grabbing onto Jack's jacket. A silent gesture of trust. It was enough. Just then, the distant hum of the Scythral's ships grew louder. Jack stood, his heart pounding. This was it. The final stretch. They had moments before the Scythral's scouts reached them, and even less time before the main force arrived. He glanced at Zaira, then at Liza. The odds were stacked against them, but Jack had faced worse before. He would fight with every last breath if it meant saving them. The canyon entrance darkened as the first Scythral's soldiers appeared on the horizon. Jack gripped his weapon, the weight of the battle ahead settling on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. The ground trembled as the first wave of Scythral's soldiers marched into the canyon, their insectoid forms moving in eerie unison. Jack stood on the ledge of the ancient structure, watching their approach, his weapon ready. Below him, Zaira and Liza hid in the shadows, too weak to fight but trusting him to keep them safe. There was no escape now. This was their last stand. The Scythral's moved with ruthless precision, their black, armored exoskeletons gleaming in the fading light. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was not just about survival anymore. Zaira's device, a weapon capable of disrupting the Scythral's hive mind, was their only hope. If they fell here, the knowledge it contained would be lost, and with it, the last chance to end the war. Jack took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. He had fought impossible odds before, but never like this, never alone. He glanced down at the alien child, Liza, whose wide, frightened eyes were locked on him. Jack knelt, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Stay close to your mother," he said softly. "I'll keep you safe." Liza nodded, his small hand trembling as he gripped his mother's arm. Zaira, though weakened, looked up at Jack with a gaze full of quiet determination. Through their brief telepathic connection, Jack could feel her trust in him, her unwavering belief that he could save them. The Scythral's reached the base of the canyon. Without warning, they surged forward, their shrill battle cries piercing the air. Jack opened fire, the crack of his sidearm echoing off the canyon walls. His shots were precise, taking out the lead soldiers, but more poured in behind them, relentless and unyielding. A Scythral's warrior leaped at him from the rocks below, its razor-sharp claws gleaming. Jack ducked, rolling to the side as it slashed at the air where he'd just been. In one fluid motion, he drew an alien energy blade he'd scavenged earlier, the glowing weapon humming in his grip. He lunged, driving the blade through the creature's chest. The Scythral's screeched, its body convulsing before collapsing to the ground. But there was no time to rest. More were coming. Jack knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He was running out of ammunition, and the sheer number of enemies would eventually overwhelm him. He glanced back at Zaira. Her breathing was labored, her eyes half closed as she struggled to stay conscious. Liza, huddled next to her, watched the battle unfold with wide, terrified eyes. Desperation gnawed at Jack's resolve. He needed to buy more time, but how? Just then, an idea flashed through his mind, a risky, last-ditch effort that might just tip the scales. He turned to Zaira, his voice firm but calm. "The device. Can it be amplified? Can we use it to take out more of them at once?" Zaira hesitated, then nodded weakly. "It would take all my strength." Jack didn't hesitate. "Do it. I'll cover you." Zaira closed her eyes, clutching the crystalline device in her trembling hands. A soft glow began to emanate from it, faint at first, then growing brighter. The Scythral's soldiers, sensing the shift, surged forward with renewed fury. Jack threw himself into the fight, using every ounce of skill and training to keep them at bay. The energy blade cut through armor, his sidearm picked off distant attackers, but the swarm kept coming. Suddenly, a pulse of energy erupted from Zaira's device. The air crackled with electricity as the Scythral's soldiers froze, their movements becoming erratic and disjointed. Jack watched as the hive mind link faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. It was the opening they needed, Jack seized the moment, pushing the remaining Scytherals back with a ferocity born of desperation. One by one, they fell, their coordination shattered by the disruption of their network. Within minutes, the once overwhelming wave of enemies had been reduced to scattered, helpless individuals. As the last of the Scytherals collapsed, Jack slumped against the wall of the structure, gasping for breath. His body ached. His muscles screamed in protest. But the battle was won. He had done it. They had survived. Zaira's glow faded as she lowered the device, her body slumping from exhaustion. Liza rushed to her side, wrapping his small arms around her. She smiled weakly, her eyes locking onto Jack's with gratitude and something deeper, respect. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind howling through the canyon. Jack holstered his weapon and walked over to them, kneeling beside the mother and child. Liza looked up at him, eyes filled with awe. "You saved us," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack smiled faintly, ruffling the boy's hair. "We saved each other." As Zaira rested, Jack's thoughts turned to the future. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the bearers of hope. The knowledge Zaira carried, the device that had saved them, could turn the tide of the war. And Jack, the human who had fought against impossible odds, was now a legend among the Atrine. The Scytherals would come again, but now the galaxy had a chance. And Captain Jack Monroe, the human beacon, would be remembered as the man who lit the way.